Hey guys, in this video, let's attempt to create a, I would say, topologically advanced 3D model that is low poly, so it's game ready, and at the same time, you can see it has a lot of seemingly complex detail. So how would you go about modeling something like that still needs to be super low poly? Maybe it's a mobile game asset, or just another, maybe, one of hundreds of swords in the game. So you really can't have it to be super dense and high poly, right? We want to create a game ready sword. And how do we do it? All right, so to get started, let's come up with a story. So let's say we have a client that sent us a reference image, and maybe this was a concept art created by another artist, whatever the technique was. Let's say our job is to turn this into the low poly weapon, right? What would be the best way to do it? So there's a couple different methods that I would like to discuss. One would be to use Maya, and that's what I'm planning on showing you how to do. Another way of doing this would be to maybe turn this into an alpha image, and in Photoshop, literally just turn this to be a white silhouette on a black background, and then just use that to project the geometry and kind of extrude the thickness. So that would be another way of doing it. The downside of using ZBrush for that, I feel like you don't really get the exact control of every single polygon. You can attempt to use Zero Mesher or Decimation Master, and that will give you a decent result really fast, but you still don't get the full control of every vertex. If you want to create a high quality production ready asset, you probably don't want to use something automated. You want to really hand make it, right? And that's what we're going to be doing today. So let's do that. So the first step that I would like to do once I'm in Maya to attempt to create the sword is I definitely would need to import the reference image in here so I can trace it, right? So to do that, I'm going to press spacebar and to go into my quad view. And let's select the top view right here. And I'm going to go to view. I'm going to go to image plane. And I'm going to do an import image. And I am going to give out this image in the description so you can download it as well and follow this tutorial, right? So I'm going to do import image. Let's find our image. So here it is. I'm going to bring it in. And this is what it currently looks like, right? So once we set it up on the plane, we could increase the size of it. And maybe let's keep an eye on this perspective view and just make it a little bit larger, right? So something like that should work. Now, another thing I'm realizing is that the reference image is obviously sideways. Maybe it would be beneficial for us to turn it, straight. And we can do that from the top view as well. So just kind of straighten it out a little bit. Now it's clearly not symmetrical, so you can see that this is a little bit more advanced. There's no symmetry whatsoever between the left and the right side. And that is the reason I chose this image for this tutorial, is because I want to show how would I go about creating something like this, right? So let's go ahead and do, we'll just straighten it out. Another thing we can do is if we select our image and go into the attribute editor, in here under image plane shape, we have a dial, right? So it's called alpha. It's called alpha gain. We can dial this down, and maybe we don't want the reference image to be so bright. So I'm just going to make it just enough. All I really need is just a silhouette of the design, right? Of the reference that I need. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to set it to 0.5 or 0.05. And honestly, this should be perfect. Another thing that I want to make sure is that when I model, I don't accidentally select the plane. I just need this to be kind of a frozen reference. So for that, I'm going to go into my channel box. I'm going to come down into these layers, and I'm going to click on this button here to create a new layer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my layer to R, stands for reference. And this is going to make sure that I can no longer select this image. I still have full control of it. I can hide it. I can, of course, change this back. But in the meantime, I do want to keep it as a reference. Now there's a trick. If you select something and turn it into a reference and it seems to be frozen, but for whatever reason, let's say you want to move it around, you could still come to the outliner and select it here and then press W and move it around. So that's a little trick. You can bypass the reference mode and using your outliner, so keep that in mind as well. All right, so now let's discuss what would be the best method of creating custom geometry to kind of follow this intricate design. So there's a few different ways of doing it. One would be maybe drag a box out and then extrude the box to follow the outline. That would be one way of doing it, and that's a pretty good way. Another way would be holding down the shift key and then right mouse click and then drag down and use create polygon tool. So that would be another way of doing it. If you click on that, you can see that you can just start clicking and creating kind of custom geometry that way, and then press enter if you want to commit. So that is also a decent way. I think there's a third one, and that's the one that I would like to use. I would like to use this tool called Quad Draw tool, and I believe that's going to be the best tool to use to kind of trace this. Now, Quad Draw only works on the live surface, so because this is an image plane, it's not really part of a mesh set, and therefore it can't be turned into a live surface in order to use the Quad Draw. So we do need to create a little trick. For that, I'm going to grab a plane, and I'm just going to drag a plane right over the image, and I'm going to use this as my live surface. So just think of this as like building something on top of a table. So this is going to be our little table, and that is, we can control the height of it. That doesn't really matter whatsoever. I'm going to leave it on 0. And the next thing I would like to do is I'm going to turn this into a live area by clicking on this little magnet. So I'm going to click on that, and now this is live. I'm going to press spacebar to go into a top view, and now I need to make sure that my tabletop here is see-through, so I can see my reference image. For that, I can click on this little button X-ray, and you can see what that looks like. So now we have two things going on. We got the reference image projecting our reference, and we have the tabletop being used as a live surface for us to use our Quad Draw on top of it. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to zoom in, grab my Quad Draw tool, and manually, very carefully, let's just start laying down topology that we think is going to work for our low poly sword. So I'm going to do, this is going to be a little bit time consuming and maybe not as fun to watch. So I could technically fast forward, but for anyone who doesn't mind and maybe wants to learn a few tricks along the way, you're welcome to watch the process. But one of the things I want to point out, obviously, if you lay a point down and hold down the shift key, you can hover and between the space of these vertex points, and that's going to lay down or create a new polygon for you. That's how Quad Draw works. Another cool thing about Quad Draw, if you go to your modeling toolkit, you can see that while right here, you can see while the Quad Draw is being selected, we have all these amazing things that are available to us, and one of them is the keyboard mouse shortcuts. So if you want to get really technical and deep into shortcuts, you have a list that Maya gives you that will make this process even easier. But for this tutorial, I'm just gonna kind of stick to the basics. And the basics being, you need 4 points to create a quad. So for example, I can hover over a point, any one of these, and I can drag them around, which is really cool, very powerful. You can see what that looks like. And I'm gonna attempt to stick to quads, but if I needed to, I'm totally fine with having some of these being tries as well if needed. And because keep in mind, the major difference between using quads and tries, the reason most people stay away from tries is because during animation, right, it's very difficult to predict how some of the models might deform. But if you have a static prop like the sword, and it's not going to be deformed or animated, it doesn't really matter if it's quads or tris. And then obviously one more reason for using quads versus tris would be if you wanted to smooth it, right? Sometimes the tris will act in a kind of an unpredictable way and don't really smooth as you desire. So that's definitely another reason. So keep that in mind. So as you can see, I'm just using, I'm just gonna think of this as quads, and here's an example of a triangle being created, and I'm totally fine with that. I'm gonna press shift and just turn it into a tri. And very quickly, I'm just gonna go around, and it's kind of fun. To be honest with you, it's almost meditative in some strange way. And if you come into a situation like this where you have a quad, but it doesn't need to be a quad, clearly this line, the reference line is straight, I could just drag this and merge it, and you can see it kind of snaps into another point, and now this point turns into a tri. So that's a useful piece of information as well. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and fast forward this part, and I'm gonna take my time and just go around this whole shape and turn it into kind of a clean outline of this sword. All right. Now, one thing I wanted to point out, like for example, right here, I have a strange situation where I don't really have a point to create the grid that I want. So for that, I could always grab a cut tool, and what I could do is I can create a point right here manually and just simply press enter, and then switch back to quad draw, and then hold on the create maybe another point here, and then do something like that. So I can always do that. Keep that in mind. So the cut tool is very useful and works really well with quad draw. And another thing I want to point out is if you wanted to delete something, for example, let's say you created something out here, or maybe sometimes you have weird dots just floating. That happens a lot actually when I just lay them down. For some reason I find random dots. You can always just make a quad, and then what you could do is you can hold down the shift command and then just click on the little thing, and that's gonna X it out or delete it. It turns yellow when you hover over it. And again, you do have a little cheat sheet showing you how to do that. So you can just look at this and see what needs to be pressed, right? So Control Shift left mouse button will delete the dots, or if you want to delete the you can also do Control Shift left mouse button and drag across faces to delete them. So if I do Control Shift, I can just drag across and then delete them that way. So I don't want to do that, but I wanted to point that out. All right, I'm going to keep going. All right, so once you're done creating your topology, there's one other thing that I want to point out. One thing you could do also to make your geometry kind of maybe pretty and distribute it a little bit better, you can hold down the Shift key and just kind of carefully smooth this out, but do it in such a way where you're not ruining the outlines, right? You can do the inside geometry, but you really don't want to move the outside points too much, right? Because they are following the contour of our reference image. So you could do the inside very carefully and maybe redistribute some of this topology a little bit nicer. So keep that in mind. That's definitely an option. All right, so let's say you are happy with your custom laid out low poly wireframe, right? So the next thing is going to be pretty simple. All we need to do is just extrude this out, and simply we need to create a texture, right? A texture that we can just simply overlay our wireframe, and that will give us all the detail that we want. But the hardest part was definitely doing this step, where you're just literally just creating the topology for the mesh to hold the shape. All right, very nice. So now how do we get out of the quad draw? Well, to get out, all we need to do is just simply click on our selection tool and right click and go to object mode, right? Now if I press spacebar, I can go into my perspective view and take a look and see what's happening here. We can now delete this table, right? So we don't need this anymore. So I'm going to jump out of the live mode for this. I'm going to select this shape and press delete, and now you can see what that looks like. We can also turn on our wireframe, and maybe if we wanted to, we can select go ahead and let's select our reference image, go to the attribute editor, and we can pump up the alpha back up so we can maybe see how that's actually overlapping, and if we're, if there's any touch-ups or if you want to adjust any points, you can move those around, but you can see what that looks like. Okay, so as our next step, let's go ahead and create a texture out of this. And currently the image that we have is definitely not laid out well as far as thinking this in terms of texture, right? If this was a UV sheet, you definitely don't want to have all this ginormous space being wasted, right? So let's go ahead and create a texture, usable texture, just using Photoshop, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and take this image and open it in Photoshop. All right, and this is what it looks like. If I go to image size, you can see what that looks like. It's currently 854 by 776, right? Now, one thing we know about textures is that they must be square, right? We don't want our textures to be not square, right? So what can we do? We need to go to image. Let's go to image size, and let's figure out how big we want our texture to be. For this example, let's just do something like 2000. So I'm going to set my width to 2000 and say okay. So how do we make this square? Well, to make the square, let's go ahead and go to image, let's go to canvas size, and let's just increase our height to also be 2000. That would be great. All right, and now we need to just simply lay out this image in a better manner instead of this. So I'm going to unlock this, and I'm going to grab my lasso tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the handle from the blade, and I think that would make a lot of sense, right? So to do this, let's go ahead and zoom in, and let's just simply do something along these lines. I'm gonna just select this whole blade right here and just literally just make a selection. I'm gonna zoom out, grab my lasso again, hold on the shift key and just add to my selection. Grab the rest of the blade. Now I'm just gonna do Control X and cut it out. And let's do Control Shift V to put it back into place. But now we have two layers in Photoshop, right? All right, so next let's go ahead and grab our handle. I'm gonna hide my blade for a minute. I'm gonna grab my handle. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna cut this out as well. So let's go ahead and do Control X, do Control Shift V. And now if we hide our background, we can see what that looks like. We have our blade and we have our handle, right? Now I don't really care what the background looks like or what color it is or anything like that, because this is going to be our texture, so it doesn't really matter. So I can honestly delete it, and I can just do something as simple as just simply, let's go ahead and set it to white color. So we have a white background, and we can call this BG if we wanted to. And we have our handle, and we have our blade. All right, let's hide the blade once again. For our handle, what I need to do is, if this is going to be a texture, I definitely want to make it larger. So I'm going to do something along these lines. And let's go ahead and go back into scale, and let's just utilize all of this space much better, right? So we'll make it larger, and we'll go all the way all the way to the edges, but we don't want to go past the edges, right? Obviously, so something like this should be perfect. I'm going to unhide my blade and do the same thing. Let's go ahead and go to rotate. And I know those of you that are Photoshop masters, there's probably a million little shortcuts you could do make this faster, but I'm just doing it the way I know it, and I'm trying to do it in such a way where you can follow me and see what I'm clicking, right? So I'm just going to scale up this blade, and I'm going to use it as my texture. So technically, all we need to do now is go back into Maya, bring this in as a texture, and make sure that our wireframe, or our 3D topology, kind of follows this new layout instead of our reference image. So let's go ahead and do that. So now we're done with our texture. So I'm going to flatten this out, and I'm going to save it as, I'm going to export this out as a JPEG. I'm not going to worry about image optimization or anything like that. If this is a mobile game asset, you guys know that this texture size would have to be much smaller, like 512 by 512 most likely. A JPG optimized and compressed is what you want. You wouldn't want to have a 2000 by 2000 texture applied to your, like a game asset, because that's going to make your file size ginormous, and it's completely not necessary, right? But for the sake of this exercise, I do want to make sure that we have nice high-res textures. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and export this out, and let's call this sword texture, and maybe we can also call it 2K, just so we know that it's 2K color map, right? I'm going to save it. All right, amazing. Now let's jump back into Maya. All right, so we're back in Maya. We probably don't need this anymore, so let's select our image plane and just press H to hide it, and now we are left with just our mesh now. Now, one thing that I want to point out is obviously the texture that we just created has two pieces, right? It has the handle and it has the sword, right? The blade. So for that, we need to make sure that, let's go ahead and do the same thing with our UVs. So I'm going to go into your poly modeling, and then click on your textures. And now from here, let's go ahead and do UV planar. Let's go to options. Let's click on Y-axis, because we want to project this from the top, and just say apply. And we can see what that looks like. So the next step is going to be, let's go ahead and bring our texture so we can kind of match our UVs to the texture that we just created in Photoshop, right? So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to object mode. I'm going to select this, and I am going to do something really simple. I'm just going to apply a new material, and I'm going to do a Lambert, and that's totally fine. So this is going to be my sword texture. So I'm going to call it, let's go ahead and call it sword texture. We can pump up the color, and we're not going to worry about a normal map and ambient occlusion and all of the other maps. We're just creating kind of a simple, clean color map version of this low poly weapon only, right? If you wanted to, of course, get fancy, you could do that as well, bring it into Substance Painter and go crazy with painting and all of that stuff. But for this exercise, I don't want to make it too complicated. I want to keep it relatively simple and just kind of follow our process of just using the concept art as the main look for the sword, right? So again, I'm going to pump my color up. I'm going to go ahead and click on this little checker box, and I'm going to find the JPG that we just exported from Photoshop. And here it is. It's called sword texture 2K. I'm going to say open. So now I know that this texture is applied to the sword. So we could always turn on our textured button here and we can see the results. And obviously this is not currently aligned properly. So let's go ahead and select this and go back into your UV editor and take a look and see what's going on here. So, all right, amazing. So now we have something to follow and use this as our guide. So again, I'm going to select my mesh, project it from the top, and I have it right here. And now you can see as we begin to align our UVs with the texture is going to show up on our model, right? And that's exactly what we want. So let's go ahead and separate this blade from the rest of the handle. So to do this, I'm going to select these edges here. Holding down the Shift key, I can just create this line. And then in the UV editor, let's go ahead and do a press cut, which will now allow us to double click on this blade, press W, and let's just move it into position, press R to scale it, and attempt to scale this somewhat proportionate to what the texture is. You can press E to move this around, and then press W, move it up and down, press R once again to scale it. Another thing you could do if you needed to is you can right click on this and go to UV, and you can manually move these points. So I can select one, press W, and just manually kind of readjust my UVs to match my texture. So that's an option as well. Just keep pressing W and selecting the points, and that should work. So very quickly, just at least align the very edges of these, right? Once you are done, you can of course see what you're doing right here in the perspective view, and the result should look something very similar to this. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing with our handle. I'm going to select my handle. If I needed to, I could go to UV shell mode, select the entire thing, press R, scale it, press W, move it into position, and let's go ahead and zoom in by just using our middle mouse button. So that's gonna zoom in and out. If you hold on the Alt key and hold the middle mouse button, that's gonna allow you to pan around, so that's useful as well. And at this point, this is gonna be a little bit tricky, but we need to align our mesh. I'm gonna press E, maybe rotate it a little bit, press R, and it looks like I need to make it a little bit longer. And press R again. And what I need to do right now is just go over each edge and just kind of make sure that it's not outside in the white area, right? I need to be every single UV to be inside my texture for this to work, right? So I don't want any white background showing up in my actual image. So to do this, let me just very quickly zoom in and just kind of make final adjustments by going into UV mode, pressing, and I can even do groups, right? I can select entire groups and just kind of move them into position and very quickly go around the entire image and make sure that this is perfectly aligned. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through this part, and I'll see you in a second. All right, so I think I did a pretty good job. Once you're done, right click, go to UV shell, and you can select the whole thing and just make sure that it's indeed overlapping and it's inside the mesh, right? And it looks good. And then if you close your UVs, right click, go to object mode, you can see what that looks like. Now, one thing that we've done is obviously we overlapped, and let's go ahead and close this as well. Now we overlapped our geo with the texture, and it looks amazing from the top view, but obviously now we need to worry about the other side. So let's go ahead and flip this over and create a thickness to this, right? So to do this, I'm going to select the entire mesh. I'm going to click on extrude, and I'm just going to simply extrude this up, creating a little bit of a thickness. Now, I don't want it to be too thick, but just something along these lines I think is great. And as we do that, you can see that the texture will be applied on both sides because it is literally overlapping itself. So if you look inside the UV editor, you can see that as we're extruding it, the geometry is stacking itself in the same location, and that's going to allow you to maintain the texture position on both sides, right? Obviously, the thickness of it, let's think about what's happening here. So the thickness of all of these polygons here, right, if you grab all of these, what texture is that? Well, that's going to be the part of the texture that is these, this border here, right? So it doesn't have any side information because this image doesn't have that. So there's a couple different things we could do. We could extrude, we could create its own UVs and just maybe do like a side design of what we think this might be. That would be one way of doing it. Or in this case, for because this is kind of a simplified version of this sword, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it black. So I know that all of these border edges are inside the design, so the outline of that is going to be, you can see it's kind of just black design, and that's fine. I think that totally works. Now, one thing I would like to do is I would like to maybe make these to be more like a sword, so it's a little bit sharper. So once you figure out your thickness and you like it, let's go ahead and go into the object mode and take a look what this looks like. Okay, and I do like the thickness to be in the on the bottom where the blade is, but maybe here we can make it a little bit sharper, right? So to do this, we could just simply select all of these points here, and we can press R, and then we can go to our soft selection, turn soft select on, and let's pay attention to this gradient, the fall off, right? So the fall off is, as we drag our fall off radius, you can see that it's kind of growing, selecting more and more of the sword. So I'm gonna go all the way to kind of this area here, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna decrease the thickness and make the tip to be somewhat sharp, and then you have a nice fall off towards the base of the handle. All right, and this is what it looks like. Now if we turn off our wireframe, and let's go ahead and turn off the grid as well, and you can see what that looks like. So very quickly we took the texture and created kind of a low poly version of the sword without doing anything in Substance Painter. We just used the concept art as the actual texture. So that was the reason for this exercise, and you can see that our geo is super low poly, right? We only have 696 faces, and most of them are quads. If you want to count tries, we're about 1372, which is excellent for a low poly game weapon. This is perfect. If you needed something even lower, of course you can go through and merge some of these points and get this even lower. But in my opinion, let's go ahead and select this and press F. In my opinion, this is absolutely perfect. Now, sometimes in Maya, if you start seeing this kind of stuff, green boxes, keep in mind that's just your, most likely your camera. So if you turn off, if you hide that, that's not going to be visible, right? Now, another thing you could do, obviously, is you can insert an edge right in here, and let's try to do that as well as one more step. Let's go ahead and do, let's go to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop. Let's click on Options, and let's do equal distance, or let's do multiple, and let's do 3. Let's just add 3 edge loops right in here. So I'm going to press B on my keyboard to deselect the soft selection. All right, so you can see what that looks like. Now, if we go back into our selection, let's right click, go to Edge, and let's double click on this. And let's actually turn soft select back on. I'm going to turn that back on, and I'm going to dial this down way lower to maybe So it's barely even on, like 0.3, or let's do a little more. How about 0.9, right? So we'll do something like that. Now if I grab my scale tool and start scaling this outwards, you can see that you can create a little bit of a shape in between there. And so maybe you don't want it to be perfectly straight. So that's definitely an option. And another thing is maybe we don't, I'm gonna press B to turn off my self-select. Let's select both of these edges, hold on Control and Delete. And then we're left with something like this, where we have a little bit of a shape going on the edges, right? And maybe that looks even nicer. All right, so thank you so much for watching this video. Again, I hope you learned something new, maybe a new technique or a new way of thinking of this and approaching it. And the way I see it is every prop you make, it's almost like its own little puzzle. So it's fun sometimes to brainstorm and figure out different techniques of approaching a way you can build this. So there's many different, usually 3 or 4 different techniques or methods you can use to build a prop, and I always find it to be really fun to try to solve and see which one would be the best. All right, so thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in our next video.